recording button.
Done.
All right, excellent. Well, good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our cybersecurity webinar. I am Anastasia Chapik. I am with New Resources Consulting. We're a technology firm based in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, but we do business nationwide. And I'm thrilled to introduce our presenter today. He's a fantastic speaker. So he's the Chief Security Officer for TierPoint, which is a partnership or partner organization with New Resources. And the name of our guest speaker today is Paul Mazzucco. So he has a very interesting background, not only in cybersecurity, but also in human behavior. So I'll give Paul an opportunity to introduce himself in a couple of minutes. Before then, I want to mention a couple of logistics. So one is this event is being recorded. So if you have any concerns about that, please feel free to disconnect. We will keep everybody on mute until the end of the presentation, where you will have an opportunity to ask questions. And I would encourage everybody to think through some questions during the presentation, because Paul is going to share some of interesting statistics and interesting insights about cybersecurity and human behavior. And let's try to make it interactive. And we will hold the Q&A session at the end. So you have the ability to ask questions via chat. So we'll monitor chat throughout the presentation. And then you can also ask questions live at the end by unmuting yourself. And I think that's it. So Paul, over to you.
Thank you very much. And I'm very pleased to be here. Let me take a moment and sort of go back as to what qualifies me to be here. And I'm humbled to be speaking to everyone today. So my background is in human behavior, but not the kind of human behavior that a clinical psychologist would sit down and sit across from somebody. We worked in behavioral neuroscience, and I had a company that was a manufacturer and developer of software, not only analytics, but algorithms for behavioral technology. So new drug discovery, any kind of brain discovery drugs, psychotropiatrics, something that was going for FDA clearance, we would make the testing apparatus that the FDA needed in order for repeatability. And we were bound by CFR Part 11, good laboratory practice mandates, and we ended up moving a good portion of our R&D into human testing, human behavioral testing, and we digitized what was known as the Stroop procedure. This was a old analog procedure for soldiers coming back from battle to make sure that they had the ability to better integrate into society. And the flaw of the Stroop procedure is that it was an analog test, and humans have biases. So the tester would sit across from the soldier and administer tests, and because of human biases, if the tester didn't like the shirt that the soldier had, or didn't like the haircut, or whatever insert here, because of those biases, the early Stroop procedures were about 65 to 68% accurate. And that is awful in two ways. It's awful potentially for soldiers who really need help, who might not get it. And it's also awful for soldiers who may not really need help, but end up slipping through the systems. So we worked and we created a digital version of this. And after many rounds, many tests, and many algorithms, we ended up getting a system that's 99.9% accurate. And we started developing it and rolling it out to VA hospitals. And eventually that led to me selling my company to Harvard. So during that process, I needed somewhere to keep my data safe. And that data was stored at a local Lehigh Valley, Pennsylvania data center. And we got security certifications, and that data center hired me when I was done doing my integration for VA hospitals, and that led to merger and acquisition, and eventually TierPoint bought my company, and now TierPoint is the large intergalactic overlord that I'm pleased to be the Chief Security Officer for. So I have some history with the behavioral analytics and how the human brain works, and how does that translate into security as I understand it and want to see it across the board. So there are some real issues that come up with how does the human brain work and what fear. And the fear of change, and specifically the fear of the unknown, is an evolutionary human behavior. The human brain loves routine. And as we're going to learn later in the presentation, the human brain likes things to be simple and repeatable. So our inner comfort zone is to always feel in control. And it really doesn't take much for our normal fear of change to become a full-blown phobia when it's irrational or when there's a very persistent or very intense change that happens. So what does this mean? It means that when we experience life changes that have an element of the unknown, especially issues around safety and security, this can actually trigger survival instincts and what we call the flight or fight response. Again, your brain likes to be in control. And the need to feel safe and secure does not just count towards avoiding accidents while driving or having your front door locked at night. If we are not sure that we are secure in most aspects of our daily lives, the fear can be intense and oftentimes crippling. So uncertainty generates a strong alert response in our limbic system, and this is literally what generates our ability to worry. It's why we worry. So let's go good or yet unfortunate. Good yet unfortunate example is if we have lost our jobs or aren't sure how we're going to pay our bills. In today's COVID society, this is an unfortunate reality. Even during life changes that are generally thought of as positive, like getting married or getting engaged, we can still feel an element of fear as we're fundamentally making a change, and the consequences of that change are really not yet known to us. So humans are hardwired to have predictable outcomes, and this is crazy. I'm going to say it twice. We would rather fabricate, our brain would rather fabricate a potential solution with a negative outcome than not know the outcome at all. People ask me if I said that right all the time. I give this presentation on stage and people raise their hand. I'll say it one more time. Humans are so hardwired to have predictable outcomes that our brains would literally rather fabricate a potential solution with a negative outcome than not know the outcome at all. That's how much our brains want to be in control. So our brains also like to take the path of least resistance while processing information, so we don't have to reanalyze every experience every single time. For example, everyone hearing my voice now probably does not have to think about the fact that they're sitting down in a chair, nor do they have to think twice about the fact that their shoes are tied. Their brain noted that these things happened. You got a security, you put it in a container that says, I've sat down in a chair a million times and I understand that this process happened, I'm comfortable, move past it. I've tied my shoes a million times. My brain says, I'm putting it in this container. This experience is not unique. Let's store it and let's move past it. So besides looking at things that our brains want to containerize, we like to label things and store information, including beliefs and memories, in logical clusters. So when a new experience happens, the brain has to decide where is it going to store this information that the experience has generated. And we'll try to do that by finding a cluster of experiences that we have previously had which are familiar. So if the new experience is an unknown and unique experience, the brain is still going to try and make it fit somewhere with what it already has known. So the feeling we get consciously is one of clutching at straws or feeling uncomfortable with a situation we are unsure of, trying to make it known and trying to make it understood. Obviously, we can have new experiences and enjoy them quite a bit, but how we respond depends on many factors, including our personality, etc. So generally speaking, though, this is partly why the human brain finds it hard to allow changes and make changes and to embrace something new, because the biggest fear humans have is back to where we started, the fear of the unknown. It's very difficult to get past that. So our fear of failure fuels that fear of change. And understanding what our industry is working hard to protect clients against sometimes helps to give some background and make those decisions a little bit easier. So there's a couple things that we see across our large attack infrastructure in 2021. And we've been dealing with some of the things you're about to see since 2016. A lot of the new attack vectors are old attack vectors, and a lot of the things that we see across vast interfaces are the same things that we've been seeing and struggling with for a long time. The attackers are getting better. They're getting smarter, they're getting more well-funded, and our internet world is expanding. The points of entry, the things that we see as commonplace 2 years ago are no longer commonplace. And there's a whole bunch of new attack vectors that we really need to see and be ahead of. So let's go over some of the things that I fight all the time with my clients and some of the things that we really worry about. And some of my top security issues for 2021, by no means is this an extensive list, but these are the top ones that I literally have come across my desk all the time. And it's phishing. Fastest growing ransomware delivery protocol is email. Internet of Things, IoT, used to be what we would consider large industrial control systems. Not at all. We now know that IoT is everything from home cameras to name brand doorbells with video and as well as industrial. We'll get into some of those details. And the hackers, as I said, are getting much better. They're using artificial intelligence. They really use machine learning. There's not a whole lot of true artificial intelligence labs for rent out there, but they're certainly using aspects of artificial intelligence and machine learning, and they're using it on dark web data that they're gathering around us. So we'll kind of go around how are these new attack vectors happening and what are security professionals doing in order to try and keep everybody safe. So let's start with phishing, deceptive phishing. There's a couple different phishing attacks that we see across our large interface, and we'll go over a few of them, but the biggest one, the largest one, is deceptive phishing, and it's the most common type. So hackers need a way to evade detection from email filters that are out there now. So what do? For deceptive phishing especially, they want to try and impersonate a legitimate company. So they do this by including legitimate contact information, that they're trying to spoof corporations and gather data from online infrastructure. They're blending code. They're using different layers of code and trying to embed malicious code into standard code in order to get past some of the exchange, whether it be O365 or on-prem exchange. They're embedding different kinds of code in order to try and evade what Exchange is looking for a very obvious malicious code infrastructure. They're hiding their links. So if you really look down, once we get our security teams involved, if you really look at the links that are associated with phishing emails, they're very long and broad. And if they showed up on your email, you would giggle at them. They would obviously be something that nobody would click on for fear of their boss knocking on the door. But when they actually go in and craft campaigns that use shortened URLs to try and fool security gateways, it's literally just waiting for somebody to get through, enter credentials, and then the illegitimate longer link shows up. But at that point, the damage has been done. We have email filters that look for embedded logos. They look to see if the logos are legitimate. Well, what happens is that now hackers are smart enough in using machine learning to change the logos just enough so that the logo looks legit, but at the same time, it's not getting picked up as an illegitimate logo across that infrastructure. And short and sweet is the key to deceptive phishing. Keep your message short, keep it on track, try and get somebody interested enough that they're going to click the link without having to go through pages and pages. Nobody's going to read past 3 or 4 sentences in order to get to the meat of what your phishing campaign needs to be. Second one is spear phishing. This is common from dark web data using a lot of stolen corporate data. And this attack usually tries to have some sort of personal touch. So lots of documents are housed on cloud services out there, and these cloud services get compromised, and it's not uncommon for usernames as they pertain to what is your email format for corporations to be listed out there. So it's not that hard to send bulk emails, wait for out-of-office responses, get the out-of-office responses, and figure out very quickly, you only need a couple of them to figure out here is exactly how this company organizes their email infrastructure. So whether it's paul.mazzucco@tierpoint.com or pmazzucco@tierpoint.com or PMAZZ, whatever the infrastructure is, looking at and validating 5 or 10 or 20 out of office responses for a large company is going to very quickly give you validation of this is exactly what the email layers need to be, and this is exactly how I need to paginate this so that I stand a better chance of getting through some of those email filters. And then compare that to social media. Look at social media and try and figure out, especially on company sites, what are the organizations doing? Where are they located? What can I do to make that email even more personal? Is the company located in Chicago? Am I going to be offering deep dish pizza coupons? And Amazon coupons are always a good one. They try and make it personal, link it back to corporate data, and then give you something that's of interest to where the company should be located. CEO fraud, this is my favorite kind of phishing attack. So tons and tons of record out there. It's also known as whaling, and it uses CEO credentials for the corporation. So I get emails from my CEO all the time, and my CEO has a certain style of writing emails that let me know pretty quickly whether it's truly my CEO sending me a message. And I know very quickly whether, because of some key things that my CEO uses all the time, I know very quickly whether it's really him or not. The biggest use of CEO fraud is, and some of the bigger attacks we've seen are, we're sitting at the board table, we need information, we're trying to close, we don't have any of the employee W-2 data, I need you to send it to me immediately. And we've seen lots of attack vectors and lots of successful attacks involving CEO fraud and the use of those credentials. And then the last one we'll go over is farming. So farming is a little bit different. This is actually a DNS attack in some ways. So farming goes to and points to a legitimate website, but they try and re-account and redirect to something that's malicious. So it's called DNS cache poisoning attacks, and it allows me to harvest usernames and passwords and all of a sudden use that information to bring you to a site that's not even remotely legit. So we point you to an illegitimate site, we did some web scraping, we gathered information to make the page look like something legitimate, and then once you put in your infrastructure credentials, we store them, we bring the malicious code down, and we use it for the next targeted DNS attack, and lessons learned. So one thing we'll touch on in a minute is that machine learning can now launch millions of simulated email attacks and phishing attacks across an infrastructure without having to send a single email. So it's organized by vertical. We'll talk about it in a second. I just always find it fascinating that we can validate as a hacker whether a campaign's going to work fairly well without ever sending our first email out. So the next thing we'll talk about is IoT, Internet of Things. So it's all of these small little Linux devices that are interconnected to go out. They usually call home to some sort of command infrastructure, some sort of command server. They download updates and protocols, and they go through and have a single purpose. So IoT devices have grown exponentially. 2021, when I first started talking about IoT in 2017, we expected there to be about 25 billion infrastructure devices by 2025. We are probably looking at much more than 75 billion as 5G rolls out, and some of the IoT infrastructure realizes that there's going to be quite a large market for targeted 5G infrastructure communications based on the availability of all of these micro towers that are out there. So the Internet of Things is, again, small devices, and we used to think early on that they were something that was industrial. So the Internet of Things was always thought of as our home cameras, et cetera. I touched on this before. Any kind of device that was interconnected. But what we've learned after some large attacks is that the Internet of Things is also machinery infrastructure and shipping logistics and retail infrastructure, and unfortunately healthcare, building, energy management. all of these same Linux infrastructure built cheaply to the lowest bidder around the world, embedded chip, embedded code, embedded communications, very easy to compromise, and again, purpose-built historically without a lot of security layers being built in place in order to make sure that they did what they did. And how did we start discovering that this was such an issue? It really started with a piece of malicious code called Mirai. So this really came about, and we really started learning about what it was back in 2016. We had some significant website attacks that really brought to the forefront that this is something that we need to be aware of, but we didn't quite know or understand at the time exactly how it worked. We now know exactly how it works. It's a bootloader written in C. It listens and has command and control services. It's self-scaling and self-protecting. So it looks for other connections. It looks for places that it can bring other bot information to, and it calls home command and control and sends more bots down to that infrastructure. And the way and the reason it was so effective was literally because of 61 factory default credentials. So 61, think about that, 61 username and passwords allowed hackers to gain control of hundreds of thousands of devices that nobody bothered to go through and do a fix on. So, I mean, even admin, we joke about it. It's become the security joke, admin password, admin 1, 2, 3, 4. Hundreds of thousands of devices were connected, and the bootloaders and the command and control infrastructure figured out that if they broke it down and used just 61 factory credentials, they could gain control of hundreds of thousands of devices. So we say, okay, we have 100,000 devices. What does that mean? 100,000 devices actually allowed for massive attacks. So all of these devices are sitting on some sort of network infrastructure, and because they're sitting on network infrastructure and they're told to call home and start doing what they need to do, they came online and started launching large attacks, and they started launching and gathered together launching denial of service attacks. So in September of 2017, Krebs on security, Brian Krebs, his site was hit, and it reached about 670, I believe, gigs of attack traffic, sustained attack traffic. And then variations to the code hit OVH, a French online host, the very next day. And then a month later, it hit Dyn, which proved that DNS attacks and trying to cripple the internet using DNS redirects was something legitimate. And that code, that same basic code package, has changed, been resent out. We've seen it as WireX, we've seen it as Reaper, GenX, Double Door. There's tons and tons of changes to the basic Mirai bot code that are still present and still for sale out there on the dark web. And it doesn't cost a lot now to just go out. You can enter your Bitcoin account, and you can download, and you can have literally a DDoS attack for hire for $500 in less than an hour. So this is what we're facing all the time. So what are the things that we can do in order to protect against this? The biggest one is, and marketing, I can't believe they let me do it, but the biggest one is literally patch your shit. It's that easy. Install antivirus, keep your software up to date, use strong passwords. Make sure that all of your legitimate passwords are changed and none of them are repeated. I don't know any one of I know one password. I literally have a password management system, and I know a very long, complicated password with dual factor authentication in order to get into my password management system. With a gun to my head, I could not tell you a single password to any of the other sites that I use because I don't know them. It generates very strong passwords and keeps everything together on my behalf. Firewall management, it's really not hard to use Windows Firewall or get a third-party firewall. For $37 a year, you can get a pretty good antivirus, anti-malware, and firewall infrastructure that goes out and applies some level of machine learning to your protection. It learns, it looks for code that's malicious, it looks for access control lists and gets updates from around the world threat feeds in order to help keep ahead of what are known bad sites and what do you need to be aware of. So we strongly recommend. There's some real easy basic maintenance that I talk to my groups all the time about, and it really just comes down to fundamentals. If you get hacked because you didn't bother getting or upgrading your Windows 2008 server and it's 2021, or you can't do certain things, then you really need to assess, can I bring in a third party to give me a hand with this because I don't have the time or the ability to get it done? These are fundamentals that really pay dividends. So the last and probably the biggest threat that we see out there on this infrastructure is the threat of artificial intelligence and machine learning. So we use AI, hackers use AI more and more every day. They're well funded, and the new attack vectors and the layers that we see out there in the marketplace really make it so that it's so much better and more efficient for hackers to get their payloads into networks and to get their data out of those networks. So what are we seeing? We're seeing customized attacks. So as the machine learning infrastructure learns about the target's networks, it can create and change attacks based on what it's seeing from the outside world. So it can go through, look for evasion techniques, understand, do you have API calls open? Are you running certain third-party softwares that there's published lists that say if you run this third-party package, you have this port open in your firewall, and if you have this third-party package, you have this port open, etc. So they do a lot of recon, a lot of reviewing all of your outside non-credentialed infrastructure and putting it into these evasion systems to look for what is my path of least resistance. The general knowledge used to be that hackers could sit in your infrastructure for 180 plus days before they did anything. We're not seeing that with our clients, and when my team gets called in for forensic help anymore, we're seeing in some cases that the malware and the hackers were sitting in the infrastructure for 3 to 4 weeks now before they gathered enough data and they monitor enough emails and they look at enough network infrastructure that they can now build very efficient hacking infrastructures. And sniper focus. Once the attacker's in your system, again, doesn't need to be 6 months. They can quickly scan, find the exact file types, the embedded content that they need, extract that data, and move on. And hopefully move on to your friends and family and trusted vendors, because you've now established update protocols and security protocols through vendors that we've seen with some major hacks that have shown up in the news recently. It's very difficult to protect against a vulnerable third-party trusted vendor, and we're seeing that across a very large infrastructure now. So they're looking at using machine learning and AI to fortify their infrastructure. Now, what do we do to make our infrastructure a little bit better and a little bit stronger in an effort to try and fight back? So we use our own artificial intelligence. And again, there's not a lot of actual AI labs. It's really machine learning. But what do we want to do is we want to really minimize false positives and false negatives and take away the human limitations. There's certain things, again, humans have biases, and humans are very poor at making some connections that should be automated. So security operations staff, I have a security operations staff that are located in 2 cities across the United States, and we follow the sun 24/7. The best security operation technician that we have could maybe review less than 100 events in a shift. I think I could maybe review 10. That would be a gift. So it's very difficult for a human to look at proper correlation for anything that we would consider a random event. So having a human remember that, you know what, I'm seeing this attack vector now, and didn't I see that 90 days ago? Or did I see it 30 days ago? Well, I just saw it today. If all of those events happened in 1 second, all the red lights would go off, and any security professional would say, oh, we're under attack. But having a human try and remember what happened 30, 90, 45 days ago is a difficult task. It may not have even been that technician's shift. There may not be log files that have been completely wiped or were done with that level of analysis. There just needed to be a better way in order for me to make sure that my very well-trained security operations teams had the ability and the understanding that here's really what I need you to concentrate on. And the rest of this is sort of low-hanging fruit, and we're going to review, file away, be proactive, but we're not going to spend a lot of time on this. Let's try and get the amount of data that a human needs to review to a very low manageable scale. So there's some techniques that we use to go through that. And the largest technique we do goes back to behavioral training is anomaly detection. So understanding and getting rid of false positives and false negatives is really key to shrinking down that data and looking at a better traffic pattern. So we want to look at and be proactive. Again, there shouldn't be an antivirus program on the market 10 years, 5-10 years from now. If we don't understand anomalies and traffic sniffing at the edge, I can't imagine as networks get faster and infrastructure gets faster that the key to protecting my endpoints is not going to be a protection mechanism running on my edge points. It's got to be a protection mechanism running at the edge. I don't ever want that data to get through. So we look at regression testing. We looked at very large rule-based detection protocols, and we want to do a proactive research and forensics on the fly. So as I mean, I don't just want to be reactive. I want to be as proactive as possible, and I want all of this data to have smarts behind it and some teeth behind it so that we're just not in another 45, 90-day window where we're trying to look back and understand what did happen and not seeing what's happening real time. So there are tons and tons and tons of machine learning algorithms that are available out there, and there are tons of them that you can go to Microsoft Azure's machine learning lab, and you can spin up a lab and test hundreds of them for free and see what works best for you. There's a couple that really work for me, and they work for me uniquely because my company has thousands of clients in hundreds of verticals with thousands of different data points and egress, ingress, infrastructure because of the nature of our business. So understanding that data flow and understanding large clumps of data coming into my infrastructure, there's a couple machine learning layers that really worked best for me. And the biggest one we use is principal component analysis. So we want to emphasize any pattern variation in our data sets coming through. So we break down our data. As you can imagine, we have Cisco and FortiGate and Radware and Imperva and all of this switching infrastructure. And again, 40 plus data centers, 27 large networks, points of presence. If I just dump all of that data into one large bucket, we'll never get through it. I don't care how many systems my CEO sends me a phishing email and says I'm allowed to buy, I'm never going to get through that volume of data. So we break it down and we look at what's coming in from our compliant hosting infrastructure, what's coming in, and are we geo-blocking from known bad infrastructure? How are we breaking down this data so that, again, by the time I get rid of all the false positives and negatives and all of the low-hanging fruit, I'm left with something that my technicians can then weigh in, do an actual analysis on, and give a vote. Well, how can we look back with this, looking back at how can we recognize and build these behavioral patterns? So the second piece that I like and that I use quite a bit is linear regression testing. So we take network attack traffic, look at it over time, compare it to normal traffic, and we break those large clusters into a line graph that allow for logical data sets. And when I'm on stage giving this presentation, I like to give the analogy that if we're sitting, I'm a cigar smoker in case people don't know my background. So we're sitting on my back deck and we're having a cigar together. And we have a glass table between us and it starts to rain. For a few moments, we know which 3, 4, maybe 5 or 6 raindrops hit the table first, and our brains are fast enough to give a quick pattern analysis to understand which one of these hit. Well, after 2 minutes, we just have a puddle. And after 2 hours, if we're dumb enough to smoke in the rain for 2 hours, we have a table filled with water that's overflowing. It is impossible for us to sit across that table and say which one of these drops of water was the very first drop. But if we run all those drops of water through an analysis package, and every drop of water becomes a data point on a line, and I don't care if that line is 5 inches or 5 million miles long, every drop of water becomes its own data point. And now I can run it through my neural network and say, show me every drop of water that was 38 degrees. Then it very quickly shrinks up all that analysis, and it has a very clear understanding of every one of these drops of water is this temperature. And now I say, every drop of water that's 38 degrees and fell from 4,000 feet, and then shrinks it up more. How many drops of water are 38 degrees, fell from 4,000 feet, and were less than 1/8 of a millimeter in size? And shrinks it down, shrinks it down, shrinks it down. And we look at it and say, how many times have drops of water like this hit over the last 90 days? And it starts to do an analysis. And the neural network spits out, here's what we're looking at. We've seen it this many times over 90 days. And now we say, these drops of water are malicious traffic coming from China. And these drops of water are malicious traffic coming from Russia. And we can build an umbrella over that table that says this firewall is my umbrella to never let these drops of water through to hit this table again. So the ability to look back and have everything as a point in time really heightens our behavioral training and understanding of how are we going to process this level of data. So what do we do with that data? Well, we have to put it into some sort of learning network so that we input the data. There's a layer in there that does some level of analysis, and then we can output usable data within our infrastructure. So the little neural network on the left, that's my company. We're small. We're great big network infrastructure, data center infrastructure, but our neural networks are small in comparison to large military, very large companies that do nothing but neural networks. But we're smart because we have friends in the industry and we trust them and they trust us. So our little neural network slides very well to the right, and we become much more of a deep neural network, a deep learning neural network. So we share our attack data and our understanding of the infrastructure with trusted partners. And we get the benefit of their attack infrastructure. We can see all the raindrops they're blocking, and I can now block those raindrops in Italy when I see attack traffic that's heading my way that's already being blocked by military groups that have neural networks in Italy. I can block in Israel. I can block in Canada. I no longer, by sharing information and it's scrubbed information, it's just the attack vectors themselves. There's no client information. There's nothing, if you looked at this raw data, that would indicate that it's actually my company. But by putting it into this neural network, we have a pretty large understanding very quickly of what are we looking at and how do we become stronger and better stewards of protecting clients across our infrastructure. And understanding what this hidden layer does and how it learns is sort of interesting. So how does this actually work in a neural network? So it's algorithmic testing and obviously machine learning. And the more points of data that we feed into this infrastructure, literally the stronger the analysis becomes. So everybody's familiar with facial recognition. And we're on Gen 6 or 7, maybe 8 of facial recognition. And it's just amazing how accurate it has become. Facial recognition requires about 200 million images of training in order to be 98% accurate. And humans are almost, they're like 97 point blah blah accurate in facial recognition. So what does this mean? That means that when we're looking at these facial measurements and the algorithms created to look at it, early facial recognition didn't care what color your skin was, didn't really care if you had hair, didn't really care at all about what your eye color was. Newer facial recognition has more advanced algorithms that start to take those layers into account. But really, it was 68 facial points of data that would go through, and train these neural networks to recognize humans. Speech recognition, everybody who uses an iPhone says, "Hey Siri." So that's 10,000 hours of audio analysis in order to start training an effective speech recognition infrastructure. That's 10 years of normal sound in order to start training that level of infrastructure. So that's a ton of data points, 2 million images and 10,000 hours of audio. So there's needs to be an extraordinary amount of data to feed into this infrastructure for it to be effective. And where do we get that data? Well, they get it from us now, which is fantastic. So Google, Amazon, Facebook, you see them in the news all the time. There's fistfights over what level of privacy and who owns what and who owns why. So everybody's seen these captchas and everybody's clicked on, click on all the boxes with cars and click on all of the boxes with street signs. What are we doing? We're telling Google algorithms that the Google algorithm says, we believe that this photo has 5 cars in it. We believe this is a car, this is a car, this is a car, this is a car. And the Google algorithm says, I need validation to train this model to make sure that when the algorithm thinks it's a car, we have human intervention. So let's put it out there. And for free, we humans say, you're right, Google, this is a car, this is a car, this is a car, and this is a street sign, this is a street sign, and this is a street sign. I never know if I'm supposed to click on the far right side of the street sign where the little round, it's like a little sliver. I'm never really quite sure if I'm supposed to click on that or not, but we're giving this data and using this data for security, but also we're feeding the infrastructure and facial recognition. So in the early day, I'm not on Facebook, but I look at what my daughter's doing to make sure everything's secure. And in the early days of Facebook, you used to have to tag somebody. Somebody would have to say, I'm having a cigar with Paul Mazzucco on the back deck, and it's raining, and here's a photo, and they would click somewhere on my face and say, this is Paul Mazzucco. That doesn't happen anymore. The minute Facebook recognizes and the algorithm, because they have so much data now, says this is now Paul Mazzucco, and you're in this photo, and whether you want to or not, we know it's you, and we're going to tag you if the person who owns the photo says that it's okay. So we fed it so much data and so much infrastructure that, again, we now know hands down that this is photo recognition and how many millions and billions of photos have we fed this engine in order for it to be accurate. And again, even Waze, they test the algorithms by asking us to interface with it. Here's a slowdown. Is it really a slowdown? Yes. Are there police officers hidden here? Yes. Is this a better alternative road? Yes. We feed these engines all the time on behalf of getting this free service. And people much smarter than me have said it, but I love this saying that if it's free, then you're the product. And understand this is how you monetize, allow them to monetize this infrastructure. So we get the benefit of these very large companies doing very large testing across these behavioral models. And we now take the behavioral profiles and we take those data flow classifications back from the neural networks, and we essentially use it to validate and write contracts to our edge infrastructure. So good behavioral data is locked into a contract that leads to a zero trust infrastructure. Anything not very clearly outlined in my contract is considered bad, period, blocked. If you come to me and say, I need to be in this highly compliant, highly secure infrastructure, we're going to build edge analysis and protect your infrastructure by not letting anybody or anything knock on your door unless they get past the doorman, and there is very clearly a contract that says, I'm a friend and I'm allowed in here for this reason. Constant data analysis, constant validation of good behavior versus false positives and negatives in order to really understand how good is our system and by protecting our clients and ourselves real time. And then how do we prove it? What do we do? So we go in and we actually go into trusted analytics platforms and we validate those data points. And we look to say, are the training sets accurate? And are we looking at something that's not just black and white? Well, unfortunately, some of those things really are black and white, and there's some behavioral biases that even come into looking at behavioral infrastructure for machine learning. So we borrow something from marketing called asymmetrical dominance, and it really just points out it's as simple as this. Humans, our brains like to make very simple comparisons, and we want to err on the side of making an accurate comparison, but we really like to compare easy things that are easy to compare. And when I'm on stage again, I use this quick analysis. We're getting married and we're going on our honeymoon. And for our honeymoon, for $500 a night, we can go to Rome and get a beautiful room and all our meals are included. Or for $500 a night, we can go to Paris and get a beautiful room and all of our meals are included. Or for $500 a night, we can go to Rome and just get a room. Now, when you present those three options to, I think it's 98-point-something% of humans, they pick Rome with meals or Paris with meals. Why? Because it's very easy to inject this third option that is not attractive and can easily train the algorithms, whether it be our brains or a machine learning algorithm, can easily train the algorithm that this data set is garbage. And the faster you can recognize this garbage data set, the faster our brains can realize that Rome for $500 a night without any food is just not a good deal. So Rome with food and Paris with food now equal the next level of our neural networks in our brains. Now we have to decide, and there's other pieces that come into play. Do I love Italian food? Do I love French food? Have I been to Rome 5 times, but I've never been to Paris? There's now a next level of analysis and understanding that needs to take place in order for our brains to make a logical decision based on more information, the next level. But we've gotten rid of all the low-hanging fruit. We've gotten rid of the dumb, shouldn't even be in their answer, but it is in there because we want to train the systems on what we're looking for and give as little information to our humans as possible to make the final decision. But it is a human final decision, and I don't, and we don't yet as an industry, just rely on machine learning. And here's an example of why. There's always going to be a role for humans in this, because even the best Google image searches right now are only about 85-88% accurate, picking out these golden doodles versus fried chicken. And they're about 90-something% accurate, picking out these chihuahuas versus looking at blueberry or chocolate muffins, whatever they are. So our brains, we can look at these and look at other analysis pieces and pretty quickly figure out this is a dog, this is chicken, this is a muffin, and this is a chihuahua. But the algorithms, just relying on the algorithms, still have the ability to get it wrong. And we want to make sure that we help it and have a human make that final decision. Partners that we work with that bring me and bring our companies in, that we all talk about sort of the same thing. How do you get past that fear? And we're going to make this available to you, and you can work with your partners to best figure out what layers you want to see in place and how can this happen across that infrastructure for me. And that's it. We thank you for being part of this. Are there any questions now?
Thank you, Paul. Fascinating information and very interesting statistics. So, you know, it's amazing to see how sophisticated the cybersecurity attacks are becoming, and it's a little concerning, but at the same time, you know, it's great to see how the sophistication of security improvements that are coming along as well. So thank you for the insights. Let's see if we have some questions. So if you would like to ask a question, so please unmute yourself and you can ask a question live. Otherwise, we have a chat function that is working as well. So please ask your question via chat and we will keep monitoring it. So we'll give it a minute to see if there are any questions from the audience.
Hey,
Wonderful.
Paul. Paul, do you feel that the marketplace for security products has become overly saturated? I mean, how would a company stand out in the marketplace right now?
But I do think it's saturated. Security professionals get
a lot of LinkedIn requests and a lot of, unfortunately, hi, we've just connected and I just need 30 minutes of your time to show you why we're the best mousetrap out there. And it's frustrating. I think the market is saturated, and I think it's saturated for this reason. The companies that really stand out are not the companies, in my opinion, that simply go forth and tattletale. Again, the push in our industry is proactive, not reactive. So I think from that saturated market, the way that some of these companies can make themselves stand out is to honestly showcase themselves as, we're stopping command and control infrastructure, and we're stopping and looking at automation process to protect your infrastructure. We're not just a company that says, hey, something happened a week ago and we need you to be aware of it, and you can pay us $5,000 a month to take all of your log files and review them for you, and then come back and say, oh yeah, something did happen, and now it's been a day or 2 hours or a week that it took to get those log files together, and now we're well past the point of it really mattering. So there's only so many companies that are doing and really pushing the proactive, and those are the ones that get a seat at the table for me to actually evaluate what are they doing and why they're doing it. So I do believe that the market's very saturated, and there seems to be a new company and a lot of investor money going back to companies if they have the name security, or if they have the overarching push of security as part of their business model.
Great, thank you. Other questions from the audience? Anybody else has a question? So I do not see any questions in the chat. If you'd like to ask a question, please unmute yourself. You can introduce yourself. All right, so we do have a question. So Paul, you talked a lot about artificial intelligence and the growing reliance on artificial intelligence. Does it in itself present new threats as well as security improvements? So what is your perspective on that?
Well, that's a good question. There's actually a growing field and growing layer of concern for how are we training these behavioral models for machine learning and artificial intelligence. So just like humans have biases, a human with a bias who's training and helping to create and validate the algorithms that machine learning uses can actually unwillingly inject a bias into the learning portion of new algorithms and new machine learning code. So it really is, there is a potential danger that if that bias is a bias against email, or is the bias against JSON, or is it against some level of infrastructure needs that some companies use and some companies don't, is there the ability to train the machine learning in a way that is not helpful and in fact may be harmful? And the answer is absolutely. We know that Microsoft has shut down machine learning labs that they feared were starting to become self-aware. There was a famous machine learning lab that they taught the two algorithms to communicate to each other, and the algorithms figured out fairly quickly that the way humans talk is not efficient. And they created over the course of weeks, the two algorithms communicating and learning from each other created their own language and made linguistic shortcuts in order to make the communication between them more efficient. And it got to the point where the researchers had a hard time understanding, if they could understand at all, now what the new language was really trying to communicate. So they shut the project down. So certainly there is the potential for this to be used, not in the name of good and protecting infrastructure, but again, by hackers in the name of something that is going to benefit a very small subset, not the larger subset that we would hope these algorithms and machine learning infrastructures were created for.
Okay, excellent, thank you. Any other questions from the audience? If we don't have any more questions, so couple of quick things to wrap it up. One is this event has been recorded, so the recording will be available to everybody as well as the PDF of this presentation. So it will be posted on our NRC website as well, if you're interested to reference it again. The last thing I will mention is please join us for our next event in March. So it is scheduled for March 25th. And it will be co-facilitated by a senior NRC consultant, as well as one of our clients, QBE, and it will be on agile project management methodologies. So they will be talking about best practices around agile and key learnings from the number of years of experience that they've had working with agile. With that, Paul, thank you very much again. Very interesting, fascinating information. We appreciate everybody's time. Thank you for joining us, and have great rest of your day.
Thank you so much.